Chapter 1. The fading light. The wind carried an unnatural weight that morning. It pressed against the lighthouse walls, rattling the shutters like restless fingers tapping at the wood. The keeper, her years worn into the lines of her face, stood at the threshold, staring at the lantern that had failed the night before. The wick, now cold and useless, curled inside the glass casing like a dead thing. She had saved the night with the torch, but something lingered. For years, the ritual had been simple. At dusk, she lit the lamps one by one, sealing the boundary between worlds. Never had one refused to burn. Never had the winds ripped a lantern from its perch. Never had the silence stretched so thin, as if something on the other side were pressing against the unseen veil. The sea churned below, dark as ink despite the morning light, waves dragging against the rocks with slow, deliberate force. The keeper wrapped her shawl tighter, her fingers shaking not from the cold, but from something deeper. A feeling that sat in her bones in the space between heartbeats. Her grandmother had warned her once. The walls grow thin. She had never questioned those words. Until now. Stepping forward, she knelt beside the broken lantern. She reached out, brushing her fingers over the glass, the metal frame, the damp wick. It should not have gone out. The oil had been fresh. The flame had burned steady in her hands. Yet the winds had torn it from its place, as though the very air had conspired against her. A slow dread uncoiled in her chest. Had something changed? A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Just a trick of the light, she told herself, though her breath had already hitched in her throat. She turned her gaze toward the horizon, toward the faint line where the sea met the sky. But something felt wrong. The sun was rising, but it was pale, weak, struggling against the mist that clung to the water. The keeper's grip tightened around the broken lantern as a memory surfaced. Her grandmother's voice, hushed but firm. If the flames fail, the boundary weakens. She turned back toward the lighthouse. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The air felt heavier inside the stone walls, pressing against her as she walked. There were answers buried here, among the aged tomes and forgotten relics of the keepers before her. And if she did not find them soon, she feared that tonight the torch would not be enough.
Chapter 2. The Warning in the Fog. The lighthouse was restless that night. The wind had died, yet the air remained charged, thick with an unnatural quiet. The keeper sat by the unlit lantern, fingers tracing the metal frame, eyes searching for meaning in its failure. She had spent the day scouring the lighthouse archives, running her hands over brittle pages, whispering the names of long-dead keepers. But the books held nothing on what to do when a lantern refused to burn. As twilight settled over the horizon, exhaustion tugged at her limbs. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting the silence sink into her bones. And that was when she felt it. A shift in the air so faint it might have been then a whispered dial. Her breath hitched. The voice was soft, familiar, woven into her memories like the scent of the sea. Her grandmother. She opened her eyes, but the lighthouse had changed. The walls flickered in and out of shadow. The space stretched and warped as if she were seeing it through water. The air smelled of salt and smoke, of burned wicks and old warnings. In front of her stood a figure draped in mist, not solid, not fully there, but her presence filled the room. "You are not ready," her grandmother said. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. The keeper swallowed hard. Ready for what? The boundary weakens. The lanterns alone will not hold. A chill traced her spine. "I don't understand." Her grandmother lifted a hand, cutting her off. "You must go before the next night falls." The vision shifted, twisting like smoke. The lighthouse blurred, replaced by something older, a stone path leading into mist, a place she did not know but somehow recognized. Follow the path. Seek the light that came before. The keeper reached out instinctively, but the vision crumbled before she could grasp it. The lighthouse returned, the walls solid, the silence deafening. She sucked in a breath, her heartbeat drumming against her ribs. The path, the light before. She did not know what it meant, but she knew one thing. If she did not leave before dusk tomorrow, it would be too late. Chapter 3. The Ritual of the Lost Flame. The lighthouse had stood for centuries, guarding a secret the world had long forgotten. The keeper had known its duty, had honored its purpose, but tonight, as the boundary thinned and the lanterns failed, she realized that duty alone would not be enough. She had spent the day tracing the steps of her ancestors, combing through brittle pages and faded ink, searching for guidance in the words of those who had come before. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. Seek the light that came before. She had found no mention of it in the archives, no map leading her to salvation, but in the deepest corner of the lighthouse, buried beneath years of dust and neglect. She had uncovered something else, something her grandmother had never spoken of. A ritual, not the simple act of lighting the lanterns, not the tradition passed down through generations. This was older, forgotten, perhaps forbidden. The keeper stood before the iron basin, its surface blackened with age, the markings etched along its rim unreadable to most, but she traced them with her fingers, and somewhere deep in her blood she understood. This was not just a flame. This was a barrier, a seal formed through sacrifice, through understanding, a ritual performed only in the direst of circumstances. She swallowed hard. Was this what her grandmother had feared? These storm lanterns swayed, their glass panes rattling against the encroaching wind. The lighthouse groaned, its bones shifting beneath the pressure. The air tasted thick with salt and ash. She had no choice. With steady hands, she gathered the element soil pressed from bitter roots, wick spun from forgotten fabric, the whispered name of an ancestor lost to time. She lit the flame. It did not burn like ordinary fire. It roared to life, stretching upward, twisting in unnatural patterns. Its color was not orange or gold, it was deep, shifting between blue and violet, the hues of a sky caught between dusk and dawn. The keeper felt its pull, felt the weight of its presence pressing against her ribs. The boundary responded, the veil trembled. Then, for the first time in all her years tending the light, she heard it, something beyond the boundary, something shifting, watching. The ritual was working, but was it sealing the breach, or calling something forth? She steadied herself, speaking the words traced along the basin's edge, ancient syllables shaped by those who had once stood where she now stood. The flame pulsed. The walls of the lighthouse hummed. And then a sound. Not the wind, not the waves, something else. A voice, faint, distant, slipping through the cracks. You were not meant to remember this. The flame flickered violently, twisting in a sudden gust that had not come from the sea. The keeper's breath caught in her throat. Her grandmother had warned her, but not about the boundary breaking. She had warned her about what lay beyond it. Chapter 4. The reckoning. The flame trembled in the iron basin, its unnatural hues casting ghostly shadows against the stone walls. The lighthouse groaned beneath the weight of the storm pressing against it, not a storm of wind and rain, but of something older, something unseen. The ritual had worked, but the breach had not closed. The keeper stood before the flickering barrier, heart pounding, breath shallow. The voice had echoed through the chamber, slipping through the veil like fingers, reaching for purchase. You were not meant to remember this. The words sent a shiver through her bones. She had been taught that the boundary was absolute, that the lanterns sealed the worlds apart. But what if that had only ever been a delay? What if her grandmother had known, not that the lamps would fail, but that one day the truth would slip through? She tightened her grip on the basin's edge. The boundary did not need to be sealed. It needed to be understood. The flame pulsed, fighting against the encroaching presence, but she felt it now, an unraveling, a force that did not wish to be locked away any longer. The lighthouse had never been meant to hold the forgotten realm indefinitely. It had only ever been a door, and doors were meant to be opened. She exhaled slowly, lifting her hands toward the basin, toward the twisting fire that carried the weight of centuries. She spoke, not the words of sealant, but the words of passage. Ancient syllables spilled from her lips, syllables her ancestors had buried beneath layers of secrecy. The flames steadied, no longer erratic, no longer resisting. The breach did not close. It shifted. The mist thickened, curling around the edges of the lighthouse walls, and in its depths, something emerged, not monstrous, not cruel, remembered. Figures walked in the haze, their shapes indistinct but familiar, not creatures of another world, but echoes of the past keepers long gone. Souls once tasked with guarding the light, now free to step forward once more. Her grandmother was among them. You have done what we could not, she whispered. The keeper swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. Will it hold? She asked. No, her grandmother said, but it does not need to. The flame flickered once more, and then, as dawn broke over the sea, it faded. The breach did not close, but it did not threaten. The boundary had never been a prison. It had been a meeting point, a place where the past and present touched, where memory and duty intertwined. The keeper stepped back, feeling the world shift around her, knowing that from this night forward, The lighthouse would not be a barrier, it would be a beacon. That's the final confrontation. It embraces the unknown, acknowledges that the boundary was never meant to be purely sealed, and turns the keeperess role into something more profound, a guide between worlds rather than just a guardian against them.